22 days, we are going to be so proud to welcome hundreds of thousands more Detroiters, Metro Detroiters, and visitors from all 50 states and around the world here for the NFL Draft. When somebody comes to Detroit, we have a commitment to making sure that they are safe here. When somebody stays at one of our properties, we have a commitment to making sure that they are safe and protected here. Visit Detroit represents this community to the world. We go and share the great stories. But the truth is that when people come here, when our visitors come here, they don't meet me. They don't meet our CEO, Claude, or any one of our fantastic 54 other teammates. They meet you. They meet your teams. They interact with your teams. And so it is through your hospitality, your vigilance, and your commitment to safety that we have the potential to fully stamp out the scourge of human trafficking. And I am so grateful that we have this wide range of commitment from all of you here today, showing up, working on expanding your knowledge of how we keep people safe. So thank you so much for being here. And now it is my great privilege to turn it over to the true experts, the true leaders in the fight in prosecuting and preventing human trafficking. I want to welcome to the stage the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Michigan, Don Eis. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you. I am Don Eis, and I am your U.S. Attorney. The Department of Justice remains committed to ending human trafficking, and we are so proud to partner with all of you and all of the sponsors of this program to really end human trafficking. Human trafficking is a devastating crime that violates the most basic human rights, freedom. And we are having it in our community in plain sight, whether it's sex trafficking of children or forced labor and domestic servitude. Human trafficking is the exploitation of human beings for profit, and has no place in any society. And yet every single day, this horrific crime is happening right before our eyes, and you in these industries are in a unique position to report this, to identify it, and help us investigate these crimes so that we can end human trafficking. My office has a dedicated group of prosecutors, victim witness coordinators, and support personnel work with our partners in law enforcement to prevent human trafficking and bring offenders to justice. You will hear from some of them in just a few minutes. We are so proud of the work that we have done in partnership with our federal, state, and local partners to end human trafficking. We join forces and work closely with the Federal Bureau of Investigations, Homeland Security Investigations, and other state and local law enforcement partners to identify, investigate, and prosecute human trafficking crimes. But again, no one is in a more better position than you, because a lot of this occurs right in hotels. You can see people in restaurants, and we hope that by the end of this training, you feel better equipped to identify the signs of human trafficking so that we can come in and try to help end it or secure those victims from those offenders. We investigate these cases, but a lot of them arise out of tips from the community, tips from people like you, tips from people who are just making observations that just don't seem right. And if it doesn't seem and smell right, oftentimes it is not right. We have no room for trafficking. And as employees on the front line, you again are in the best position to help us by being vigilant, learning the signs, and then knowing who to call to help us to secure those individuals. We are so grateful you are here today, that you've taken the time to join us and learn what we can do, but know that combating human trafficking remains one of our office's top priorities. And we are proud to partner with the hospitality industry, law enforcement, to help provide the tools necessary that you need. This training is appropriately titled to me, No Room for Human Trafficking, and we hope after you receive this training that there will be no room in any hotel in the Eastern District of Michigan or anywhere that facilitates or support this. No room means no room for trafficking. Thank you so much for being here. She said she was going to forget to introduce her next guest, but I forget to introduce her. It is my great pleasure to introduce a person who is both my partner in time, because we've been knowing each other so long, and crime. We partner a lot on these cases. Wayne County Prosecutor Kim Worthy is the next person on the schedule.
It's my pleasure to be here, and I have to say that when I heard about this training and let people in my staff know, I had 5 people that volunteered right away that wanted to be a part of this training. I'll be the first to admit that I was unaware that we had such powerful allies to combat human trafficking. I had no idea. And I'm so glad this came about, because we all know, and even more people will know after this training. This has always been an all-hands-on-deck prosecution and issue. And every piece that works together must continue to work together to even get these cases to the prosecution stage. And often getting there is a massive undertaking and challenge. Our partners have always been the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Michigan. And again, I talked about my staff that works on these cases. As you all know, and I feel like someone I'm preaching to the choir, but as you all know, getting our victims and our survivors to cooperate can be extremely challenging. And that is why this collaboration is so very, very important. The more ears and eyes that we have on the situation will make us helpful and will make us is critically important, especially when these ears and eyes are trained ears and eyes. We need all the people we can do and we can have to get this training done. This gives us more tools in our toolbox to work together, because as we all know, the predators in human trafficking are very, very good at what they do. And that's why we have to stand together, united, and try to combat this and get our victims and survivors to cooperate. The tool that we try to tell law enforcement all the time, and the answer is not to arrest who are ultimately the victims, but actually get them some help and try to work with them and get them to cooperate. I understand that this is in preparation mainly for a major event that's been talked about that's coming to the city of Detroit, the NFL draft. But I don't have to tell any of you in this room that the time for human trafficking is not just when you have major events occur, not just in the Super Bowl, not during the Final Four, not during major tourist events, not during major corporate events, but every day this occurs. Each and every day human trafficking goes on. And we must be ever vigilant, especially when we don't have a major event coming to town, to make sure that we cease human trafficking. It happens every day in every way, so I want to thank you so much for being partners with us in this effort, to helping us bring these cases to fruition, to help us prosecute these cases, which I said can be very difficult. And we need all the tools that we have, and all the ears and eyes that are in this room and beyond, and more people that you're going to train in the future to help us with this effort. Human trafficking is serious. It's some of the most heartbreaking work that we do in the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office, and looking at some of these victims and looking into their eyes and into their souls is very, very difficult. But it's also among the most rewarding experience that you can have, especially when you're able to permanently separate these victims and survivors from their predators. So thank you so much for having us. We look forward to this training. My staff looks forward to this training, and I look forward to even more people being educated by ears and eyes and working on human trafficking. So thank you so very much. And before I forget, it's my distinct pleasure to introduce Council Member Angela Whitfield Callaway to the stage and talk about all the work that she's done in this area, and we're all very proud of her for it.
Good morning. Do you mind repeating after me? I'm a former teacher. No room for trafficking. No room for trafficking. Say it like you mean it. This is important. Let it resonate with you. No room for trafficking. No room for trafficking. Let that resonate with you. You are saving people's lives. You are. So remember that. No room for trafficking. That simply means we don't have time for it. We're not going to tolerate it, and we're not going to put up with it. No room for trafficking. And that's not anything that I was supposed to say. So good morning again. Thank you so much for having me. First, I want to commend the Michigan Restaurant and Lodging Association and the Detroit Restaurant and Lodging Association for their commitment to ending human trafficking and providing this necessary training. And it's been mentioned before, the NFL draft is coming to our city in another couple of weeks. It's essential for our restaurants and hotel employees to know the signs of human trafficking and what steps to take when the signs are recognized. Since the Detroit Human Trafficking Task Force has been in operation, we have worked diligently to bring awareness to the issue of human trafficking in the city of Detroit. Additionally, we put forth legislative proposals that we believe will address the issue. On March the 19th, I'm proud to say, the task force held an advocacy day against human trafficking at the Michigan State Capitol in Lansing. The Advocacy Day was organized to advocate for 3 legislative proposals that the task force believes will address human trafficking in the city of Detroit as well as the entire state of Michigan. They advocated for record restriction for individuals who trafficked minors and forced them to commit crimes while they were being trafficked. They also advocated for a statewide law that requires hotels and motels to post a human trafficking hotline number in their establishments. They also advocated for training grants to fund the creation and implementation of age-appropriate survivor and educator-led human trafficking training. In addition to advocating for a statewide law to put the human trafficking hotline number in hotels and motels, the task force put forth a city ordinance to mandate this for hotels and motels in the city of Detroit, and that's my ordinance. While it may take time to get it done statewide, the local ordinance is moving through the city process right now, getting ready to have a public hearing. And I know it's going to be voted up unanimously by myself and my 8 colleagues on the council. You know as well as I do that a lot of human trafficking takes place in hotels and motels. That is why you are doing this training, and I commend you for that. The purpose of our ordinance is to assist your efforts by providing help for individuals who may need it. It is great to know that we have strong partners such as the MRLA and the DRLA in the effort to put a stop to this heinous crime. Thank you so much. Now it is my pleasure to introduce your panelists for this morning. Christopher Shigo, Special Agent, Federal Bureau of Investigations, if you want to join me on the stage. And I hope I did your last name justice. Sarah Petty, Special Agent, Homeland Security Investigations. Assistant Specialist, Homeland Security Investigation, Manny Mosley. Eliza McCoy, Vice President of Programs and Impact, the AHLA Foundation. Let's give her a hand. And thank you again.
Yes, I'm going to lower this. Hopefully you can still see me. Good morning, everyone. First and foremost, thank you on behalf of the American Hotel and Lodging Association. We are the largest membership association representing over 30,000 properties here in the United States, including all of you in this room. And our charitable foundation drives forward efforts such as No Room for Trafficking in support of the workforce, those of you who are on the front lines, serving as ambassadors within your communities, not only while you're at work, but also outside of work. And our No Room for Trafficking initiative launched about 5 years ago with the singular goal of training every single employee in this industry how to spot, identify, and report suspected human trafficking. I come from a background in law enforcement. I've been in the child protection space for just over 20 years, most recently at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children before I joined the hotel industry in 22. I'm so grateful to be standing in a room full of people on this issue. It actually gets me emotional because if you had asked me 5 years ago if this was possible, I wasn't so sure. It was not an issue we were talking about in our hotels There we go. Okay, it went out for a second. This was not an issue we were talking about. It was not an issue that we were confronting together in a unified fashion. And that's what's required, and that's what we're doing every single day. So I'm here today as a convener. My role at the AHLA Foundation is to bring together our industry with public and private sector partners to combine efforts in a solid team that's working together every single day. Again, not just around special events and major events in cities, but every single day establishing relationships and partnerships that will ensure that this continued unified approach really does stop human trafficking, not only when it's happening, but ideally before it even starts. So I'm excited today to be here with these panelists to have a conversation to start off our morning together that will be followed by the training and a much more robust discussion and interactive session with our partners here from Pact. I wanted to mention briefly before we begin, there are cards on your table and writing implements. So as you're hearing the discussion this morning and as we transition into the training program, please feel free to write down questions, concerns, ideas that you have that you'd like to share with us, and we'll try to address those during the training session as well. Because the most important thing is not necessarily that you walk out of here with knowledge, but that you walk out of here with motivation to do different. Because it's the motivation to act that will actually change the course of someone's life. I'll allow the panelists now to introduce themselves before we jump into discussion.
Good morning. Son?
There we go. Mine is.
Can you guys hear me? No? Don't we use that one?
Yeah, just pass it along. We'll just pass it along.
Good morning. My name is Sarah Petty, and I'm a special agent with Homeland Security Investigations. I am assigned here in Detroit. Our office is just a couple blocks away, and I'm in the Human Trafficking and Smuggling Group and have been for the last 8 years.
Good morning. I'm Agent Emmanuel Mosley. You can call me Manny. I'm also with DHS Alliance, which is our human trafficking and smuggling group here in Detroit with Homeland Security.
I'll give this a shot.
Just kidding.
We'll give this a shot. Can you guys hear me?
Nicely done.
My name is Special Agent Chris Siegel, and I'm with the FBI, and I'm part of a federal task force that investigates all crimes against children to include trafficking.
Great.
All right, I'm actually going to take a seat here because it's a little bit more comfortable. In general, if you could switch to the slide on the screen. Next. Thank you. Great. So here on the screen, and I'm not going to read it off, is the general definition of human trafficking by federal law. We're going to be discussing specifically today sex trafficking. The next screen. Which has a lot of unique elements to this definition, right? And I think many, if not all of you in this room, have been trained with introductory human trafficking prevention awareness training. And so you've seen this definition. You've probably clicked through a number of scenarios to learn how that applies and what it looks like. We're going to dig a little bit deeper here today with the experts that we have, because really what I'd like to know, and I think what everyone in the room would like to know, is what does human trafficking look like actually here in Detroit? What doesn't it look like?
Well, there's a couple of things to keep in mind when we're talking about trafficking, specifically in Detroit. Of course, with the upcoming draft, anytime you have a major event in a major city, we typically see the trafficking numbers go up. So currently, right now, anywhere in Metro Detroit, at any given time, there's approximately 300 victims that are being trafficked. Approximately 10% of the 300 is children, so about 30 people. So anytime you have a major event in the city, that number typically doubles. So now we're looking at 660 children. So that's the first thing to remember. Second point to make is that having done hundreds of FBI operations to recover victims, I can tell you with certainty that most of the trafficking activity is going to take place either in or near hotels, which is why this event today is so important. I think the big thing to remember though is that trafficking is often hidden in plain sight. The issue is that many times it's portrayed in the news, in the entertainment industry, in social media. It's sensationalized, and it gives the general public the wrong idea of what trafficking looks like. We have the definition up there. I think we still have it. We have force, fraud, and coercion. Many times it's sensationalized as force, right? You see a movie where you have a young victim tied up in chains, or maybe you read something on social media about someone going to the mall and getting abducted or attempted to be abducted, to be sold into trafficking. And unfortunately, that's really not the truth. It's more the rarity. The truth is that most of these victims are coerced into trafficking, and so those signs are a lot more difficult to recognize, which is why this training will be important today.
Thank you. Yes, certainly I think, most of these look like romantic relationships to the individuals involved to begin with, right? And then evolve from there. It can also look like families, because we know that familial trafficking is a significant portion of human trafficking as well. Sarah, Manny, I'd love to hear from you if there's anything you can add to what human trafficking does or doesn't look like here in Detroit.
Is this working out? Absolutely everything Chris said, and I'll make it brief because we have limited time. But just keep in mind, when you're seeing in the public, you will see trafficking victims walking around on their own with a cell phone in their hand. So to you, it may not appear that it is trafficking. They can just simply call the police. But for those of us that deal with this day in and day out, coercion is a big factor in how traffickers manipulate and use individuals in the trafficking crime. Do you have anything to add to that?
Great. No, thank you. I think it's really important that we shift this mindset from the very start today, and we'll learn how to put that into action in our training that follows. As I mentioned, many in the room have had some baseline training, but I will tell you the number one question I get when I'm on the road in hotels and bed and breakfasts and inns and others around the country, the number one question I get from industry employees is, but who do I call? Every time I go to think about making a report, it's confusing. Do I call local law enforcement? Do I call a national hotline? Do I call tip lines of this type in my state? And we coined the term hotline confusion for that reason. And so I'd love to hear from you all here in Detroit, what recommendations you would make for reporting any suspected human trafficking.
So, what we like to tell people, if it's an immediate emergency, obviously call 911. But if you suspect something that may be trafficking, you can give us a call. You can give FBI a call. We also have a tip line, the Polaris tip line. You can Google it. And that tip line, you can remain anonymous. It's 24/7. They have different interpreters. There's a language barrier. But what's good about that tip line is that it broadcasts across the country to any type of law enforcement where that potential trafficking may happen, whether it be here in Michigan, Indiana, Ohio. It broadcasts it all across the country. And it's great because if we necessarily can't do anything with it at HSI, maybe FBI can, or maybe DPD can, or Michigan State Police, et cetera, et cetera.
And when you call, Manny, if you heard him, he said Polaris, it's also known as the National Human Trafficking Hotline. I'll look the numbers up there. It is great that it goes out, so when they take the call in, victims themselves can call. They may not want to involve law enforcement. They can also call simply for victim assistance. We have victim assistance specialists in a program here at HSI, so does the FBI, but sometimes victims want to call in and get help before they go to law enforcement, so that's also an option when a victim calls into Polaris. But again, you can call our tip line, you can call the FBI, state police has one, Detroit Police Department, but in something, especially in a situation like this where we have a large-scale event, the best number to put out is the Polaris hotline because it gets funneled, and then, like Manny says, it goes out. Chris is on the feed, I am, our supervisors, and then it gives us a chance to deconflict as well. The one thing I will say about if you call, no matter what line you choose to call, when you call in, please let us know if you've already called or reached out to another law enforcement entity or a non-governmental organization. It simply helps. If I know you've already reported to the FBI, it doesn't mean that we won't do anything. It means that I'm giving them a call, seeing it where they're at. It helps us deconflict so we don't have 20 different agencies working the same case.
I just want to give one quick example of an investigation I worked that involved the use of Polaris. I thought this was a really great example. We had a young victim from the Metro Detroit area who was being trafficked out of state. Long story short, she's at a nightclub. Another patron of the club recognized some indicators of trafficking, started a conversation, and this victim broke down and said, yes, I'm actively being trafficked right now. In fact, I'm waiting for another customer to come up. So this witness did absolutely the right thing. The first thing she said is, are you in any immediate danger? And she said, no. She said, my trafficker will be back here in a couple hours, but right now I'm good. So that she checked in on the emergency component. She didn't have to call 911 at that point. She said, okay, let's call the police. And that victim obviously was very distraught, had suffered a lot of emotional trauma, and she just said, I do not want to talk to the police right now, which is completely understandable. She said, I can't do that. I'm worried that my trafficker's going to find out and I'll be in even more trouble. So this witness did the next best thing. She said, okay, let's call Polaris. We can call it anonymously, we can get you help, and we'll get this reported. So that's what they did. Polaris was actually able to get her a flight home back to Metro Detroit that night, which was amazing. And then they were able to get that information about her trafficker to us, the FBI. And then once that victim was returned home and she was able to, regroup, she was then open and willing to speak with law enforcement, which she did, and we were able to investigate that trafficker. So I thought it was a very successful example of what we're talking about.
Oh, thank you. That's really helpful, because what I'm hearing is everyone here in this room can be eyes and ears, and their job is to turn over as much actionable information as possible while also ensuring the safety, immediate safety of the individual they may be interacting with or the guests that are in the same space, right? I also know that, well, let me pause. I'm going to strategically pause. Please take a picture of this slide right here. If you take a picture of nothing else today, take a picture of this slide. Because it will be when you are in the moment that you go, oh, what was that number again? And it's also something that not all of your colleagues could be here today, right? We know that you all are working 24/7 to operate these wonderful hotels here in Detroit and across the state. Please share. Send a text to your team members. Share out to those that are not able to be here with us this morning and take this information in live so that we ensure that we're amplifying this message well beyond this room. Another question that I often get is, okay, I made the decision to make a call and to report, but then I hear nothing. I may even see that individual back in my hotel tomorrow. How do I know what happens next? And that these reports are going somewhere and things are changing for the people that I'm intending to help by making these reports. So I'd love if each of you could share a little bit more of when a call does come into Polaris and then gets triaged out to your agencies. What are you all doing in those cases to follow up?
Well, as Sarah has mentioned, when a report is called into Polaris, Sarah, HSI, and FBI, we're all in a group thread, so that report will go out to all of us. And from there, typically, initially, we will deconflict amongst ourselves. I know when the investigation gets handed to the FBI, typically what we'll do is we'll pass that information to our analyst, who will then vet out all of the information, do an initial scrub, and try to get as much background information for the investigators and the agents as possible. They'll then pass that information to us, the agents, and we'll decide what to do for the next investigative steps. Typically, that is our first step is to interview the complainant or the reporting party, which is why important we understand if you want to call in anonymously, but it's also it's very helpful if you want to be anonymous, at least leave a number, some way of us contacting you, either an email number, any way, in the event that we need any additional information to investigate.
Keep in mind when you call in, if you do want to remain anonymous, and as Chris was saying, it is helpful for you to leave contact information, so that seems counterintuitive. But when you call in, if you still want to remain anonymous, but you leave your name and number for us to talk to you, that I don't write in my report, we received this tip from this individual. If you're, the only reason somebody would know that you are talking to us or providing information is if you want them to know that. So you can still remain anonymous and allow us to call you back, because sometimes even though you believe you've provided all the information that's beneficial to us, there are certain questions we have that you might not realize that you can provide additional information. So again, we won't push you to, report anonymously or not, but just keep that in mind when you do report, that you can still provide your name and info for us to call back and then remain anonymous going forward. Okay. Also, a lot of times when people do report, whether they're a victim or somebody that witnessed something, they want to know when they'll get, further information about the investigation. Please keep in mind that we can't always release that information during an investigation. And you may see somebody that you've called on back in your hotel. And there may be several reasons for that. There may be an ongoing investigation. Unlike on TV, these do not get solved in a half an hour or an hour. Sometimes they take a couple months, sometimes they take years. So please keep that in mind. Also, there's oftentimes we will get something that comes into us, and as we investigate it or look into the initial details, it ends up not being trafficking. It might be domestic abuse. It might be child abuse. And all equally egregious crimes, they are different crimes. So here in Detroit, we have a specific group, DHS Alliance for Human Trafficking and Smuggling. If it ends up not being trafficking, it doesn't mean we disregard it, but we might hand it over to our child exploitation group or to the state level if it's a crime that we do not investigate at the federal level. So there's several reasons that it may not, you might not see some actionable in the moment.
That's very helpful, thank you, because I do think that that can lead to frustration, right? Or particularly in even receiving additional observations or information after making a report. One of the things I'm most proud about being in this industry now, in hospitality, is this tremendous balancing act that you all do every day between guest safety and guest user experience, right? Thinking constantly to ensure that everyone on your property is safe from a variety, whether it's a fire or it's drug trafficking or other domestic violence in the rooms or suicide, as well as the guest experience of hospitality. So turning to you all who focus on only one end of this equation, right, safety, but recognizing that those in the room are having to stand in front of people and ensure there's still a strong guest experience in their hotels, what kind of recommendations or advice or suggestions would you make if they are standing in front of a survivor and waiting for someone to come there, or if they have interacted with a potential perpetrator? How do we balance this? Are there recommendations about those interactions that ensure that you're getting what you need for an investigation, but are also not creating an invasion of space and privacy in the lobby or otherwise?
I would say when interacting with people that you may, that a potential trafficker or victim, especially if it's, we'll go with the victim first. And here at HSI, and I'm sure FBI as well, we pride ourselves on the victim-centered approach. The safety of the victim, with their needs and what they can help us with eventually with our investigation. When dealing with victims, you have to kind of toe that line, right? You have to be empathetic. Be normal as possible, even though you may suspect it, especially when it comes to a potential trafficker. You don't really want to tip them off, scare them away. Act as normal as possible, as you usually do. And once you contact us, we'll get there. We, especially in our group, there's always someone available to respond, whether it be on a holiday, on a weekend. We respond to all of our calls. So I say try to be as normal as possible. Just do the job that you've always been doing. And just be a little more aware, especially if it's a potential trafficker. Just take notes. Say, that helps us because you see the potential trafficker, their mannerisms, what they're doing, what they're saying. Take notes. Kind of watch them without watching, if that makes sense. And then with the victim, try to reassure a possible victim. Try to continue to assure them to help them keep them safe and whatever they may need, So.
What we don't want you to do is put yourselves in harm's way. We already have a victim that's involved. We don't want more victims or any potential violence. But you are our eyes and ears. So whatever information you can gain without putting yourself in danger, somebody's identity, I mean, you are in the hotel industry. If there's any information you can provide us about who they are, if it's, whether it's at the hotel or you're in a restaurant with your family or you're shopping, whatever it may be, if you can get a vehicle plate, again, without being noticed. So don't do anything that puts yourself in danger, but the more information you can gather and remember to provide to us helps us in our investigation or when we're looking into an incident to see if it is human trafficking. Chris, do you want to?
Yeah, I just want to add 2 points to that. I mentioned earlier that we're in and out of the hotels a lot doing operations, and one of the big things that we see is often when we go to recover these victims of trafficking, many times the trafficker themselves are nearby. Now that may be in the parking lot, in the lobby, sometimes they're hiding in that actual room and we don't know until we get inside. All that goes to say is that if you do encounter, let's say you encounter a victim, like Sarah was saying, get as much actionable information as you can, but do not put yourself in harm's way, and always have the awareness that there may be, in fact, there probably is a trafficker nearby who is now in a serious situation, right? And so there's no telling what that trafficker may or may not do. So keep that in mind for your personal safety. Also, one more small thing to think about, like I said, when we're in the hotels, a lot of times it's very helpful for our investigation to get real-time information, right? So we may recover a victim and come to one of the hotel workers and say, is there any other rooms associated with this victim? Or maybe we come in and we talk to one of the hotel workers and they say, yeah, I saw him leave in a car about 10 minutes ago. And we'll go and say, well, can you pull up that security video? And we'll get answers, especially with the bigger chains, right? We'll get answers like, well, I don't know if our policy allows that. Or they'll say, the security camera is in a locked room and my manager's off for the night. So whatever you can do beforehand to learn your own hotel's policies, to have available information for us, that would be really helpful. But to do it beforehand, like I said, because a lot of times we'll come at 2 in the morning and we'll be like, look, the hotel staff will be like, you're out of luck. Like, we got to call our corporate office and they're on the West Coast and they're closed right now. So just a couple things to keep in mind.
No, that's really helpful. It's sort of like asking you to take this screenshot. You're going to go back today and ask those policies. Think through a couple of scenarios where this could be happening on your property in the coming weeks, in the coming months, and who you would call and what you would do and what you could be allowed to share and how you would share it. Pre-plan, the way that you pre-plan for fire evacuations and other safety issues that you deal with every single day. I think it's also important to mention that they learn and establish relationships not only with law enforcement, but also with organizations that support survivors, either in the aftermath of being reported and identified, or if they don't want to report and instead want just support for themselves directly. I think those relationships are incredibly important, especially in an ongoing fashion. I'm wondering if any of you could just speak to that a little bit and how you work with nonprofit organizations and others in this space.
Sure. We all tend to work with the same organizations in the Metro Detroit area, and that is a great thing for you as hotel employees and workers and the public in general. If you do encounter a victim that absolutely does not want to involve law enforcement at that point, if you know of some of the organizations, the non-governmental organizations, so I'll just call them NGOs, that work with them, that's a great way to reach out to them, to offer them that victim support, and then that NGO can work with them to get in touch with us or to reach out to us to get us involved when that victim is comfortable. But our VAP program, our victim assistance programs, also work with the NGOs to make sure not only that the victim is safe in that moment, but going forward, and help provide the services that that victim needs. We as government agents can't house a person overnight or get them the mental or medical health or provide clothing or food long term. So when we work with these NGOs, and there's some of them as simple as safe houses for the night or long-term facilities or crisis centers, that allows us as a government entity to work with those organizations to ensure that our victim is taken care of in that moment, but also ongoing. And yes, as agents who investigate crimes, one of our goals is we want to have them help us in investigation to put that bad guy in jail. However, we also know this is the real world, and unfortunately, we don't always get a prosecution out of all the cases we investigate. So in that case, we don't disregard the victim or their needs. We're still working with those NGOs to ensure that victim safety, even if we can't make a case to take to the prosecutor, or if we do and we can't get it prosecuted, or we do and it doesn't work. We're still there working with those victims together with our victim assistance program and the NGOs that we encounter.
Great, thank you. That's very helpful information, because I think that's an evolution in this field of anti-trafficking work for law enforcement and NGOs to be working so hand in hand. And it's one of the evolutions we've made as an industry too, where I mentioned our original goal being to train every single industry employee. Well, we now have also launched a survivor fund. So a combination of many of the major hotel chains and brands and corporate entities here have contributed $7.1 million since July of 22 to be granted to community-based organizations supporting survivors across the United States. We gave out $500,000 from that fund last year, and we're getting out $1 million this year. So as you are at your seats and have table cards, if there are organizations that you are familiar with doing great work in this space, please write their names and information down so we can include them in the application process for those funds, because both sides of this equation are extremely important, primarily to help break that cycle of re-victimization. Right? True prevention is going to come at that time of, I don't like the word rescue, at the time of identification and response, and then setting individuals up on a path that eliminates the push-pull factors into exploitation so that they can lead a healthy, safe, and prosperous life moving forward. Before we close out, I'm going to throw a little bit of a curveball, but I know you all have answers for it. You do a lot of these panels. You do a lot of community education opportunities, public classroom sort of presentations. What is one myth or belief that you would like to dispel for people when it comes to human trafficking? Whether it's what it looks like, we've talked about a little bit, but you can go a little bit further, or even about what your agencies do, or how hotels can play a role in this space. Something that really gets at the core of one of those myths.
Yeah, so I'll touch on to what I mentioned in the beginning of our panel. Again, the big push through social media, entertainment, the news is often this strong overt use of force, right? And the truth is that most of these victims are coerced by their traffickers. It's more, think of it, it's more of a mental game than a physical, right? So, because these traffickers know, once they can entrap these victims from a mental standpoint, they don't have to do any more work, right? These victims are so entrapped, they will feel so indebted to their traffickers that they will do whatever the traffickers ask, and the traffickers don't have to use any force, right? They don't have to go out of their way to keep them locked in a basement. So, now I'm not saying that never happens, but it's important to know what it looks like for the majority of the time.
One of the things I would like to talk about is some of the myths. How many of you think that trafficking is maybe a van pulls up and says free candy on it and they snatch you? Well, it's good. Some people do believe that that's what trafficking is. And trafficking, as far as demographics go, it can be any age, any background. Doesn't matter what color you are, where you're from, what walk of life you come from. It can literally be anything. We've had cases where our victims have been as old as in their mid-50s. We've had traffickers as young as 15, 16 years old. So to try to dispel that notion that trafficking only looks like a certain way, and I understand over the years it's been portrayed as that, but keep in mind that we've had cases where husbands traffic their wives, mothers traffic their kids. So just keep in mind that it does happen. It can happen in your community, whether you live in the west side of Detroit or you live in West Bloomfield or Birmingham. So it's one of those things that it doesn't discriminate to a certain area of a person or a neighborhood.
I will add to that. Does anybody in this room have a vulnerability, a secret? Every single person does. We all do. And that's what traffickers, whether it's a 15-year-old trafficker or a 70-year-old trafficker, that's what traffickers prey on. Now, the amount of vulnerabilities to the extent that you have them, that may vary. But that's all a trafficker needs, one vulnerability, and they can work as quick as a couple hours to get somebody in their grip, or they can chip away at somebody's vulnerability over time. To use those vulnerabilities to manipulate a person, and often what we see more is that using that to coerce people into trafficking. So please keep in mind, like Mandy said, it can be anybody. It is absolutely 100% here in Detroit, but it is in your neighborhood. It's in my neighborhood, without a doubt, 100%. So anything that you see on TV, those make great movies. When you watch a movie about trafficking, that's one little snippet of what that type of trafficking is. But it's everywhere. And today's been all about sex trafficking, but it's also labor trafficking. So it can be absolutely everybody, anywhere, at any time.
Yeah, thank you for making this point. I'm going to drive it home a little bit more because we talk about hotel industry training, hospitality training, but the fact is this is human training, right? The information that you're learning to look for behaviors and indicators, not people, but behaviors or actions. You're going to use that as much as you do at work as you should be doing in your community, because to truly prevent this, we need to be eyes and ears in all of those settings, not just during the day. One final question, I'm actually going to point it to you, Sarah, because you did a fabulous job talking about this when we met. The last question that most people ask is, but what if I'm wrong? What if I call and it's not true?
With good intent, if you call and you are incorrect, that is okay. If you're calling to falsify something, your ex-wife is dating someone new and you want to give them, that's a problem. But when you call, something's obviously tipping you off. Then call in. We're not going to come back at you if you are wrong. Oftentimes, if it's not trafficking, it may be something else. It may be domestic violence. It may be that child abuse. It might be drugs. It might be something. And that's okay too, because if that's not something Manny or I or Chris specifically investigate, well, we've got a whole agency that does, and we have partners at Detroit Police and at the local police departments, so we can take those tips or those incidents and put them where they need to be, and oftentimes we stay involved in those, even if it's not something we specifically investigate. But you yourself are not in trouble if it ends up being something other than human trafficking, even if it's not a crime at all, because we get those too. We'll get a case. I have one right now. It was called in, it had all the red flags of human trafficking. And when we went out and started interviewing and talking to people, it's not. It's a domestic violence situation. It involves foreign nationals, but it's not human trafficking. Because again, when you saw earlier, there's a specific definition that means trafficking. So please, do not let your fear of you being in trouble call us, because you're not in trouble if you call in something that is not human trafficking.
Right, and you can call in and say, I see these things. You don't have to call in and say, I see human trafficking, right? Because that's for the professionals to determine whether or not it's human trafficking. But I see these behaviors that are concerning. I think someone's safety is in jeopardy. Well, I started by thanking the room full of our participants from the industry. I want to end by thanking each of you for the work that you do every day on the front lines and response, and as part of our team here. So thank you, and thank you all for joining us. We will transition.
We're going to take a couple of minutes to transition into the meat of this morning, which is training conducted by our partners from Pact. I will do a very brief introduction of Lori, really of Pact in general, because this is an incredibly important relationship to our industry. Pact is the leading nonprofit organization globally working to protect children every single day from sexual exploitation. They've been doing this for many, many years, driven by survivors and survivor voices, and have specifically been chosen as our partners in the hotel industry to provide free industry training on spotting and identifying human trafficking, but also to support many of our education and outreach initiatives to ensure that members of our state legislature, members of our schools and community programs have all the information needed to truly team up on this issue. So I'd like to welcome to the stage CEO and President of Pact, Lori Cohen.
guys have to go. I apologize.
That's okay. All right. Is this mic on? It is. All right, great. Well, good morning, Detroit. I'm so excited to be here, and thank you for inviting me. Eliza, thank you for that kind introduction. And I just want to thank the Michigan Restaurant and Lodging Association, the Detroit Restaurant and Lodging Association, and Visit Detroit, along with the American Hotel and Lodging Association Foundation, for inviting Pact to have us back. And I don't normally give these kinds of presentations, but I just wanted to share that when I started as a young, unfortunately much younger attorney, I got my start here in Detroit, catty corner from here on Washington and Michigan at the Archdiocese of Detroit. I ran their Immigration and Refugee Services program. And for years, I would look at this magnificent building and wonder, like, when are they going to do something with this amazing building? And it's just such a personal pleasure for me to be back here. And just shout out to all of you for really just, keeping the faith in Detroit and just making this such an amazing city. And for all of you ensuring that children in this city will be safe. So I just want to put that out there. Can we have the next slide, please? So we are Pact, Protect All Children from Trafficking, and really excited to be part of this No Room for Trafficking event today. Next slide. So who are we? Pact stands for Protect All Children from Trafficking. So our mission is to protect every child's right to grow up free from sexual exploitation and trafficking. And our vision, it's an ambitious vision, but we're sticking with it, is a world in which no child is bought, sold, or used for sex. And we are a member, Eliza mentioned that we're part of a global organization. So we are the U.S. representative, the U.S. partner of an organization that you may have heard of before called ECPAT International. We are active in partnerships with over 100 countries globally because this is a problem here in the U.S., but it's a problem everywhere, and trafficking is cross-border, cross-national. Next slide, please. So how do we do our work? Our work is really focused on prevention, and we achieve this through several mechanisms. We are engaged in education, we're engaged in partnerships, and we do a tremendous amount of legislative advocacy. We are partners with hotel associations, not only nationally but statewide, associations on looking at best practices for the hotel industry to help be disruptors in trafficking. And as Eliza mentioned, the power of survivor engagement is really important. We have a Survivors Council. It's a group of women and men because we know that both women and men are vulnerable to being trafficked and recruited, and they are our think tank. We don't develop any policy work, we don't develop any educational material, any outreach we do, we work very closely with survivors. Next slide, please. So I just want to, again, thank Eliza's introduction and mention the American Hotel and Lodging Association Foundation has been, historically, it's been a very significant partner in our ability as an organization to provide free resources to the hospitality community. We worked with Polaris, which, as we heard in the previous panel, operates the National Human Trafficking Hotline, and Marriott Hotels and AHLA Foundation to create a number of resources that can be used anywhere in this country. It's interesting, actually, we're getting partners reaching out to us globally because there is such a shortage of free material, and much of the information can be used in terms of identifying trafficking patterns. So some of the things that you see here is we've been participating in the No Room for Trafficking conferences, information sheets, and an annual guide that we've made available giving a landscape of what are the trafficking laws as they pertain to the hospitality industry. And as I mentioned, all of these things are available to any of you for free. Next slide, please. So I know we've been sitting in on the previous panel discussion. It was a really rich discussion from what is law enforcement doing in this space. And we are going to talk a little bit more in depth about trafficking. And so I just think it's important, and when you're working with your teams, to just keep this in mind. These conversations can be very difficult because the circumstances that involve trafficking are really hard. And so if anyone is feeling uncomfortable at any point and needs to leave the room, please do so. And just realize that this can be a normal response to some very difficult content. Next slide, please. All right, so question, click. All right, what comes to mind when you think of human trafficking? Eliza mentioned this is going to be a little more interactive. I was told that many of the people in the room have already taken this training, and you've now had this previous conversation. So what comes to mind when people think of human trafficking? Someone. Yes. Fronts for, tell us about fronts. We need to get a microphone so we can pass it around the room. I can walk around the room. I feel like a game show host. All right, so you're saying business fronts. Let me come down. I'm going to walk on down to you so you can be the celebrity for the moment.
So business fronts that shelter and transports victims.
So transport, right? Transport, housing their victims, absolutely. People who are trafficked can be transported, they can be housed, and because you get an answer, you get some Pact swag. Have a button. Okay, I saw there was another hand up over here. I'm going to walk around. Yes, ma'am.
I worked in an emergency room and I was the exploitation wanted to come in the room when you interview a patient. All out so they could talk private. And I would have no problem doing that. With a lot of police at the hospital I looked at. So that was no problem.
Oh, thank you. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Let me give you a button. Take a button. Go on in. So I will share with you, I got my start here at the Archdiocese of Detroit. I actually did not realize if I was representing trafficking victims. It was only later on when I moved to a different job where we actually got a call from the hospital about a young lady who had been there, and these relatives kept showing up, and she was not happy to see these relatives. She was really agitated, and we actually worked with the hospital to